Hello. I've lived in my first American house now for about 3 or 4 months, and I've been getting a lot of questions from people back home saying things like, Lawrence, what's it like to live in American suburbia after all this time? And I don't really have an easy answer for that. Obviously, I've never lived in American suburbia before, but something that you've got to understand about us British people is that we have a sort of romantic view of what American suburban life might be like, and that's partly due to how we've received the information through films such as those of John Hughes or Suburban Commando with Hulk Hogan. And we usually come away from it thinking, alright, so American suburbia is this place that is not to be trusted whatsoever, at the same time being a place that Americans most want to live. And so now that improbably I find myself living in American suburban land, it's time to answer, what is it actually like living there? And my answer to that question does come in several parts, but I'm going to break it down into just two. No, probably several. The first word that comes to mind when I think of my life here in American suburbia is quiet. And I know what you're thinking. Lawrence, quiet is just code for boring. And let me tell you, that is true. It's quite boring here, but that's not necessarily a criticism. You know, that just means that no bad stuff happens. You wouldn't think it, listening to Suburban Sue, but for the most part, no bad stuff happens. It's really quiet, but it's boring, right? There are no barcades for 4 miles. That's why I got a dog. Taking your dog for a walk around here is one of the best things you can do. You suddenly become part of this committee of dog owners, and you bump into other members of this committee, and they all talk to you as if they've known you your entire life. And for me, this wasn't part of the bargain. This wasn't part of the deal of getting a dog. I didn't think I'd have to talk to any other humans. That was one of the good things of getting away from the city. But now, if you have a dog on a leash, specifically if he's a puppy, suburban Americans will talk to you. Now, thankfully, they mostly talk at the dog, so you don't really have to even make eye contact if you don't want to. And that's good, being British. But everyone and their mother has a dog. And actually, now that I've said that out loud, I realise it's not quite true, because there are some people who, in their yards, have these signs that say, no dogs allowed. Who are you to say that dogs aren't allowed, right? This land that you've been paying a mortgage on and you think you own, you don't own it anymore. My dog owns it. Look, he did a little poo in your garden. What are you going to do? Oh, you're coming at me with a rake. All right. But speaking of yard signs, Americans are big fans of those, aren't they? Even in the off-season, right? Even when there's no politics happening whatsoever, which is never, when there's no election, people will have yard signs about all kinds of things. I passed one the other day that said something like, drive like your kids are playing in the street. And they obviously weren't familiar with my game because I don't have kids and I don't drive. So it just prompted me to want to ride around on my bicycle with reckless abandon. Might try it, actually, and see what people do. But for all of its boring niceties, it's a good place to live, this, you know. Quiet can be good. Quiet can be, especially if you're making YouTube videos, which I commonly am. The only noises you hear around here are that of cardinals and hoses and lawnmowers. But the other word that pops into my head, more so here than I think anywhere else I've lived in the United States, is the word rectangle. And that's because everybody lives in their own little rectangle here, don't they? It's not just the house in which they live. Their garden is rectangular, although admittedly that's usually the same in Britain. But their streets are rectangular. Where I live in the Chicago suburbs, it's just one giant collection of rectangles. In fact, you might even say it's a babushka doll of rectangles. Because while Cook County isn't itself rectangular, it is surrounded by counties that are. And I imagine that within those counties you have rectangular streets, and within those streets you have rectangular gardens containing American flags, which by their very nature are rectangular and also include 14 rectangles plus some stars. It doesn't really matter how you slice it. Here in American suburbia, there's always 4 sides to every argument. One impression that those films and American stereotypes in general used to give me is that all of these houses in American suburbia come equipped with a white picket fence. And I have to say, just walking up and down my street, I haven't seen a single white picket fence. Mind you, that's probably because the squirrels ate them all. Instead, if you have a fence, it's usually one of those chain link fences that makes you feel like you're in some sort of animal prison or a Hell in a Cell match, which suddenly starts to undercut this rosy feeling that we're supposed to have about American suburbia. And you get all kind of knocks at the door, don't you? It's like, oh look, here's one of the neighbours with a massive welcoming cake, and I can't remember her name because she has a massive welcoming cake. And that's all I'm thinking about. I've just remembered I told her to watch my channel. So if you're watching, cake woman, thank you for the cake. What's your name? But more egregiously, you'll get those people come to your door saying, I'm not actually them, but I represent AT&T and would love to do you a deal on, I don't know, solar paneling. I don't know why AT&T does that. They do in my head, because everything just becomes one jumbled mess of offers that come to your postbox or just verbally to your face. And I can't stand it anymore, because it happens all the time. I'm sure other homeowners are quite familiar with getting letters through your letterbox that say, oh, big urgent news about your mortgage, and you open it up and it's this offer to refinance your house right here, right now. And if you don't do it now, you will spontaneously combust. And sadly, a lot of that literature isn't recyclable, so it just goes straight in the trash. And the same is true of all of the mortgage-related emails and text messages and friend requests. And the other thing about American suburbia, the thing that I was most convinced of as a child when I visited Florida in 1990, is that people's yards are just so pristine they look like they came off a movie set. But it turns out, at least here in the Midwest, that that is completely and utterly a little bit untrue. Because for the longest time during winter, that grass is yellow and looks like it's gonna die. But, like I said, the sprinklers do turn up around this time of year, and suddenly you do see pristine gardens. Mostly grass. That's mostly what you will see in an American garden, is just a big stretch of grass. In England, it's a bit different. We tend to have that kind of English garden mentality where we do overload it with plants in a good way. You don't often see that as much here. So it does all come down to how people keep their lawns. That is the attractive feature of an American garden. And for the most part, I think that you see gardens here in suburbia that are well kept. People do mow their lawns. But every now and again, you'll be walking along and you stop yourself in your tracks because you come across this house that's abandoned with just grass that looks like a forest. Generally speaking, though, that kind of thing is rare here in suburbia, just because I think that once it's detected, somebody will want to do something about it. You know, Joe from down the street might just bring his lawnmower and take care of it for free. I would demand payment for that. So Joe, they're taking you to the cleaners, whoever they are. And speaking of houses, this is something that took me by surprise. I've often said on this channel that, oh, American houses are absolutely bloody huge, right? Well, they are, but there's a varying degree of hugeness. Because what I found is you could have a mid-size house, even a small house, on the same street as a mansion down at the end. I mean, that happens on my street. If you walk a few houses that way, you come across the mid-size houses, and I don't know how they cope with such little space. I'm joking, this is not a mansion. And so, since my British friends have been asking, those are some of my observations of what it's actually like to live in American suburbia. By the time summer rolls around, I'll probably have 15 million more observations, so stay tuned for those. In the meantime, I'm going to leave now and take the puppy for a walk and tell him not to jump up at Suburban Sue too much. My name's Lawrence Brown. You can follow me on Twitter at LostInThePondUS, and whatever you're doing now, you've got to stop it and watch this video. Thank you to my patrons who make these videos possible. If you would like to become a patron of Lost in the Pond, you can do so today at patreon.com/lostinthepond. Until the next video, goodbye.